So I'm Tom, I'm with Real Six String, and this is going to be a continuation from the previous lesson, which was all about rhythms, and it's going to be putting them into practice in terms of a song. It's going to be Good Riddance by Green Day. I'm going to break up how to practice this into three main sections, which is what I want you to carry on as and when you practice it. Because it's far too common that somebody will try and rush it to try and get it up to the real speed that the song is at without actually practicing the elements of it properly, which ends up sounding a bit messy rather than ending up with a song, and especially elements of a song such as the strumming pattern and the chords that you can actually use moving forward. If you're very new to guitar, I recommend following through the previous video I've made on the topic to learn how to strum, but especially how to keep your strumming as consistent as possible, which is a great help. If you're a little more experienced and you don't entirely feel like you need it, it's a great way to understand it, understand how to visualize rhythms, but there will also be title screens to skip to if you would like to just get on with the song. Okay, so section one. What we're going to do is we're just going to practice over the rhythm. This is the rhythm that I've gone over in the previous video. If you've seen that one as well, you've got plenty to build on. But at the same time, it's important to make sure that you've got a consistent strumming arm, which is going to keep everything nice and relaxed. So first off, all we're going to see is 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, which is just down, up, down, up. So you're going to strum down on all of the numbers, which are your beats, and strum up on all the off beats, which are your ands. So in this case, just to give you an example of how to visualize it, it's just going to be 3, 4. So we can have 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Easy. Perfect. So now we're, instead of playing all of those, we're still going to keep the arm moving in all of those places. So the 1 and 2 and should only be able to see this as and when I strum, even when I leave the other ones out. But in this version, for the actual strumming pattern, we're not going to be playing the and after 1 or beat 3. So it can be quite tricky not to play one of the main beats, but if we build up to it, shouldn't be too much of a problem. So with that one, if you need to, you can play it all the way through if you can. It's quite a common strumming pattern, so if you've seen it before, you've got a lot to work with. But if not, you can always just break it down. So first off, you've got to make sure that you're strumming down twice in a row. And all that's got to mean is that you're going to bring your arm back up without hitting the strings in order to strum down again. So it could just be 3, 4, 1, 2. Perfect start. So after that, you can practice that as many times as you need to make it feel natural. You may not need to there, but for the next couple of steps, it might be wise to go over a couple of times just to make sure it's all sinking in properly. So the next bit is then going to have an up strum after the second down strum. So it's going to be 3, 4. Okay, so we're still strumming up in between the down strums, still keeping that arm moving just at the same rate. There's no frantic moving. You should be nice and relaxed. You should be able to play nice and smoothly. Okay, so the next section we're going to have is going to be to have another up strum that follows that one. So this one's a little bit harder than missing an up strum because we're much more used to strumming all the down strums, but all it is a matter of strumming down in the middle of the 2 to then strum up again. So it's going to be down, down, up, up. We've got 3, 4, down, down, up. Okay, so that might be one that you need to play a few more times over, which is not a problem with. The more natural it feels, the easier you're going to have moving through the chords and playing through the whole song, because you're not going to have to spend as much time thinking about every single movement on this arm. So it's well worth getting a bit of extra practice on. The next one we've got is to have another down strum straight after that up strum. So it's going to be down, down, up, up, down. Okay, so this one's going to be 3, 4, down, down, up, down. Okay, so you can practice that one over a couple of times need be. Just make sure that you're keeping that consistent as you go. keeping it nice and smooth. And the last one is just going to be another up strum at the end. So it's going to be down, down, up, up, down, up. Okay, so you can break it down into as many sections to make sure you practice it properly. The last thing you want to end up with is a... because it's just dun, 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 dun. So there's no rhythm to it whatsoever. It's just 6 even beats, which isn't quite what we're looking for. So really make sure you're keeping those 4 even beats that we talked about in the last video and making sure that your arm stays nice and relaxed. So the last example we have of the full strumming pattern, I'll go around it a couple of times to give you something to practice too. But if you want, there'll be a bit more of a run around at the end of the video to make sure you've got enough to practice with. Okay, so this one is 3, 4. Down, down, up, up, down, up, down, down, up, down, 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 up, down, 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 up, down. Okay, so an important thing to note in and around the strumming pattern is that the up that happens at the end, that's the and after 4, is the same half beat distance away from the next one as it is from the 4 before it. So there's not a break. Another common problem is that somebody will play the strumming pattern once, then leave a break, and then play it again. So it's directly afterwards as we played before. Whenever you feel practiced enough with the strumming pattern, the next section is just going to be moving on to the chords. Alright, so the next section we have, the next thing to learn is going to be the chords. So we're just going to detach them from the strumming pattern completely and we'll add them all together at the end, just to make sure we're getting the chord changes properly and to make sure that each of the chords is ringing out. The first chord we're going to play is our G. If you're not used to seeing chord diagrams, all that we have is that it's like seeing your guitar up like this. So what we call the 6th string, which is the thickest one, is on this side. And then the 1st string, which is the thinnest one on this side. And then the line up the top is going to be the nut. And then each of the lines going horizontally is going to be another fret. So first off, what we're going to have is putting our little finger on the 1st string on the 3rd fret. And then our 3rd finger is going to go on the 2nd string directly above it, still on the 3rd fret. And for this entire intro section, we're not going to move the 2 of those at all. Those are going to stay there the whole time, which makes the rest of it really easy to move around. It makes pivoting around those 2 that we have in place a lot easier. The next note we're going to put in place is our 1st finger here. So your index finger is going to go on the 2nd fret of your 5th string. Okay, and finally, your middle finger needs to come across and go on the 3rd fret of your 6th string. So a few important notes to remember throughout this is that the closer you are to the fret, the easier it is to push the strings down. So it can make it a lot easier to play, whereas if you're playing with your hand much further back, it's a lot more difficult. However, with certain fingers, they're not always going to be that easy to push to the end. So with these 2, for instance, at the very bottom, if you push that one right up to the end, it's more than likely to push the other one over the fret. So it's not going to be quite as consistent. But anyhow, that's your first chord. So give it a strum, see how it sounds, and following on from that, play each of your strings separately. So just go. And you'll be able to hear if any of them aren't quite ringing out. You'll be able to hear it, and it just means that you need to push that string down a little bit more. If it's not quite that, if your hand's a bit too flat, you can end up blocking other strings and not pushing them down properly. So try and keep it arched up so that your fingertips are pointing into the guitar to keep it ringing out as smooth as possible. So there's a lot of trial and error, a lot of tiny movements, a lot of moving about to try and make the chords ring out properly, but that's why we practice them separately and practice the changes separately, because we want them to be as perfect as possible, because then you can use them in other songs and they become much more useful than if we rush through them. For the next chord, which is called C add 9, as we've already talked about, these bottom two on the first and second string aren't going to move for the entire intro section. So it just means moving the first two fingers down by a string each. So you're going from G to the C add 9. A good way to practice these, once again, as we've just done with the G, is to play each of them separately before we run through the main song, and then move from there to the next chord. Because you want to teach your hands, you want to train your muscle memory to start responding to that movement, rather than if you strum the G, take your hands off and then back on for the C. You're not training yourself to move between the chords, only to make them up. From the C add 9, to get to the last chord, which is going to be our D sus4, what we're going to do is get rid of our second finger, which is our middle finger, and we're going to move our first finger down by a string. So for this one, we don't want this top string to be ringing out, because it'll make it sound really muddy. So if you can, this is for slightly more advanced people or something to work up to, if you can, try and bring your thumb over so it just mutes that top string. It'll still make a little noise, but as you strum the rest of the chords, it won't be noticeable and it will just stop it from sounding a little bit messier. That can be very difficult to get when it comes to just starting out, just learning the chord shapes. So don't worry too much about it. It's something to work up to as and when you feel ready. Right, and now as we have all of our chords together, the very important thing is to practice moving between them. So in this case, what we're going to try and do is just strum each chord as you move around the sequence. And especially another common pitfall is that rather than going from the end and people feel like they're finished, what it's important to do is go from the last chord back to the first chord. The more of a beginner you are, the more you should spend time playing each separately. Make sure they all ring out properly, then move on to the next one, and then finally the last one, and of course back to the beginning. So that really helps to diagnose any problems you have with your chords, really helps to make a huge difference in the muscle memory in your hand, and make sure that you're very used to moving between the strings, and it's going to make everything moving forward a lot easier. As I say, the chords changes are one of the hardest parts of getting started on guitar. So if you're getting used to those, and especially they're very common chords and they're very similar to a lot of other ones. So the better these ones are, the more luck you're going to have moving forward. And the last section we're going to have is going to be piecing it all together. And it's really important to remember to give yourself space as you do it, because you don't want to end up rushing it. You don't want to end up skipping out on the rhythm. You want to make sure that everything is right and then bring it all together. So the structure we've got for the very first line of this song is going to be a G, G, C add 9, and the D sus4. Okay, so in and around that, it's important to do the two Gs next to each other. So we've practiced the strumming pattern. We're going to try and do the two of those together, and then we're going to give ourselves a bit of space to change chords to start with. As time goes on, we want to bring those closer together. That's why we practice just our chord sequences to make sure everything's working. But for now, we're going to allow ourselves space so that it doesn't feel rushed. Okay, so the first two Gs we do next to each other because we can. We want to keep that consistency with the rhythm, make sure we're not leaving a gap in between strumming patterns. So they're going to sound like this. 3, 4. Down, down, up, up, down, up, down, down, up, down. If that's a little too quick to start with, by all means slow it down. It's just meant to be as an example that starts to feel and sound a little bit like music. Okay, so after we've done that one, we're going to give ourselves the space that we need to move. You might be able to move a lot quicker. Fantastic. But if you can't, give yourself a second to find the next chord. Make sure that you've got it in the right place. Once again, there's no point in rushing it. And then we're going to do another strumming pattern there. So there's just one this time. There's only one C add 9. So 3, 4, down, down, up, down, up. Fantastic. And then once again, give yourself space to move to the next chord. So we're going to move to the D sus4, and we're going to have 3, 4, down, down, up, down, up. Okay, and once again, very importantly, you move from there back to the G. And then once again, we're going to do that exact same thing. We're going to go twice on the G, which is going to be 3, 4, down, down, up, down, down, up, down, up. Very good. Moving on to the C add 9. Give yourself the space you need. 3, 4, down, down, up, down, up. Perfect. And lastly, we're going to move to the D sus4, do one more, and then move back to the G. And then we're ready to move on. So 3, 4, down, down, up, down, up. And lastly, just one strum on the G, because it feels a lot more complete. Sounds a lot more like the song's meant to. I recommend focusing on the introduction there first, because it runs around 4 times overall, twice for the introduction and then twice for the beginning of the verse. So try and get that one as consistent as possible, because a lot of the chords, a lot of the changes are exactly the same moving forward. So all of that, very important that you've got a good handle on that, and especially the rhythm doesn't change throughout this song. There's a little bit in the actual version where he changes it very slightly, which we'll try and fit in at some other point. But for now, I'm going to get all the basics, all the important stuff in. So try and, as I say, get used to the introduction before you move on. The next line, which runs around twice, is going to be an E minor, which is a new chord we haven't quite gotten used to yet. So what we're going to do with that one is put one finger. I recommend using your first finger or your index finger on the 2nd fret of your 5th string, and then using your middle finger to go directly beneath it for the 2nd fret on your 4th string. So it's just those two, and we're going to do one strumming pattern on there as well. Okay, so E minor is quite a useful beginner chord. It's only two fingers, 2 strings to hold down, which makes things a little bit easier to get started with. So once again, just the normal same strumming pattern we've had this whole time on an E minor. It's going to be 3, 4, down, down, up, down, up. Perfect. And then we're going to have one new chord again, but this one's not entirely new. This one's called a D, whereas the one we've played in the introduction is a D sus4. So with this one, it's exactly the same as the D sus4 that we have, except instead of having the little finger on the 3rd fret, you're instead going to have the middle finger on the 2nd fret. So to break that down just a tiny bit, we're going to have your middle finger, is easier to put on first, is going to go on the 2nd fret of your 1st string. Then your first finger is going to come over and be on the 2nd fret of the 3rd string. And then your next finger, so your 3rd finger, is going to come and sit on the 3rd fret of your 2nd string. Okay, so that's then a D. So if you then add the little finger on, D sus4, and take it off, regular D. So they're very, very similar, but they have sort of different purposes with them. So this next one we're going to use is a D. So from the E minor, we're going to go through the D, which is going to be 3, 4, down, down, up, down, up. Perfect. Then from there, this is a really important change. It's a lot harder to begin with, but it makes a huge difference as you move forward. So just as we have for the D sus4, if you put the little finger down there first, and you can make this 2 movements to begin with, because they'll soon become 1 if you practice it properly as you move around. And once again, a very important point of practicing the chords on their own first before you add the whole thing together. Okay, so this, put the little finger down on the 3rd fret of your 1st string there, and then you can move the other 2 fingers, the 1st and 2nd ones, back to where they were for the C add 9. So that's going to mean your 1st finger goes to the 2nd fret of your 4th string, and then your middle finger comes to the 3rd fret of your 5th string. Okay, so that there, if you've got that finger that stays on, it gives you something to work around, something to pivot around, and it makes the chord changes much easier. So I recommend at this point, if you can just practice moving between the 2. So from the D, you're putting the little finger down first, then moving your other fingers, and then on the way back, you're doing the opposite. So you're moving the other 2 fingers first, and then getting rid of the little finger. And with some practice, that will become 1 movement. So once again, if you can, with the same way we practice the chords, just move between the 2 to get used to the chord change. It makes a huge difference when you're trying to piece everything together. Okay, so that's the C add 9, and we're going to do 3, 4, down, down, up, down, up, and then for the next part, we're going to move on to the G. So that's just moving these 2 fingers, the top 2, back up again, both up by a string, to the 6th and 5th strings, and then 1 more strumming pattern on there. So we've got 3, 4, down, down, up, down, up. Okay, so try and practice it every step along. So try and practice each of the chords separately. Try and practice the strumming pattern on its own first. If you need to reiterate, even when you sit down to practice another time, you might need to reiterate it. And then after that, try and piece it all together, but give yourself the space you need. Okay, so the section we've just done there goes over twice round. And then after that, we have another line, which goes E minor, G, E minor, G. So we'll run through that ever so quickly, and then we'll get on to the very last line, and then it's up to you to practice the whole song round. So what we've got with this one is 3, 4, E minor, down, up, and then back to the G. So that's going to be 3, 4, down, down, up, down, up, back to the E minor again, down, down, up, down, up, and finally on the G to finish. We've got 3, 4, down, excellent. So moving on from there, we're on to the very last line, which is going to be an E minor, D, and then we're going to finish off on 1 strum on the G, which if you're going round, the song usually plays this entire sequence we've got round 3 times. But if you can, try and finish after we've done the E minor, D, which is the last line, try and finish on a strum on the G, because it feels a lot more complete, feels a lot more musical. Okay, so the last line is just E minor, D, and then we're going to do the strum on the G. So 3, 4, down, down, up, down, up, and then on to the D. 3, 4, down, down, up, down, up, and then finally to the G. So once again, important with the movement from the D to the C add 9 is that we put the little finger down first. So that's going to go on the 1st string again. And then the top 2 fingers are going to come back to the position of the G. So that's going to mean your first finger's going to the 2nd fret of your 5th string, and your middle finger to the 3rd fret of your 6th string. Fantastic, and well done. So just to reiterate, try and practice it in the 3 different sections, 3 different levels. So make sure you're getting the rhythm first, and then you can loop the rhythm especially. Make sure that you can run through the rhythm a few times over to make sure that you're not then going to have to think about that when you add in the chord changes. Then just practice your chord changes, which is going to mean running through each of them and playing each string separately, making sure that you're moving between the chords and not taking your hand off in between. And then finally, add it all together and try to give yourself as much space as you need to change the chords. Try not to rush it, and your hands, your muscle memory will get used to the movements and make everything a lot easier for you moving forward. Okay, so thank you very, very much for watching. I hope this helped as much as it could. If you could subscribe, like the video, let me know anything that you'd like to know, anything that you'd like to understand guitar or music-wise, and very good luck with the practice. And I'll see you soon.